Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is Marc Cook from Kitplanes magazine. We're having our, it seems a traditional Zoom meeting now, but with a couple of high-ranking officials, as they say, from EAA. And we're going to talk about some potential changes to the Phase I flight testing program that I think is going to have a real positive effect on not only how we go about flight testing, but sort of the efficiency of the flight test program. So I'd like actually, why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Tell me a little bit about what you do with EAA and give us a little bit of background there. Tom, we'll start with you.
Sure. Tom Charpentier, Government Relations Director here at EAA. So my role is mostly regulatory policy, but I also do a bunch of other things, medical policy, helping members with medical cases, lots of stuff. But generally speaking, the regulatory policy side of things to make flying more affordable, more accessible, and safer is what I always say.
Awesome. And Sean, how about you? I looked at your title, and it's not like you don't have a lot of responsibilities. You have just about everything they have, right?
It keeps me out of the local establishments at night, that's for sure. My name is Sean Elliott. I'm a Vice President of Advocacy and Safety here at EAA, which means I've got all of the government relations aspects of the organization, the government team, which Tom is one of my lead team members on. And I've also got all of flight operations. So our aircraft operations, both during year-round activities as well as AirVenture, including experimental aircraft that we operate here locally for Young Eagle rides out of Pioneer Airport. So very much an immersed pilot and instructor and examiner.
Well, guys, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. What we're talking about today are potential changes to Phase I flight testing. And to set the scene, for those of you who are not intimately familiar with it, an experimental amateur build airplane is required to have a flight test period called Phase I. And currently, and it's defined by an advisory circular that sets the grounds and the requirements for this. But it's typically either 25 or 40 hours. And we're going to accept for the moment LSA stuff. We'll get back to that a little bit. But for conventional or a non-LSA or non-ELSA, I should say, experimental amateur build, it's 25 or 40 hours. 25 if you've got a certified engine and propeller combination, and 40 hours pretty much for everybody else. And most people in the industry will do 40 hours. So what you guys have introduced, you did it on April 1st, which I thought, oh, okay, this has got to be real, right? Are some upcoming changes to the advisory circular. So would one of you guys like to take the lead on that and sort of give me the top level changes that you guys expect to see there? Right.
Okay, so the organization, through all its wonderful subject matter experts, resources, we've got a safety committee, we've got a home built aircraft council, we've got some wonderful talent that are volunteer based and work on a regular basis with the various parts of staff here at EAA to develop new opportunities and improvements for the home building community and our world, which is EAA. It's been an ongoing project now for what, Tom? Probably a good 4 years that we've been working task-based.
Well, yeah, for me, it goes back, honestly, back to the additional pilot program, which is close to 9 years ago now.
Sure, that's a good relevant point. I'm sure you'll touch on more details on that, but it's been long recognized that there is an opportunity to improve Phase I flight testing, and not to replace the existing structure or process, but to add an option that may be of benefit to a large number of our members. And that is ultimately the accumulating result of what is TaskBased Phase I. And Tom will run you through all the specifics of that, but it really is a wonderful addition. It doesn't take anything away. If there's somebody that wants to follow the traditional 40 hours or 25 hours, depending on your power plant and that combination, that's still very much a viable option. Make sure to keep that sacrosanct. But for those that see benefit, and there's a lot of folks in our membership base that will see benefit from this, there's now a new way to do it. And it's a much more sophisticated, much more accomplishing way that enables the home builder to have a lot more usable and useful information and data at the end of Phase I to safely and successfully operate their dream project. So with that, Tom, you want to kind of run us through where we're at with the AC and the work that's been done?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we at least as far as my involvement with it has gone, we first proposed a task-based phase one program as part of the work we were doing on the additional pilot program back in around 2012, 2013 timeframe. Obviously, at that time, the additional pilot program was kind of the front burner issue because it was a direct NTSB recommendation, that was the priority. But additional pilot program lets you do a lot of things that, the task-based phase one lets you do a lot of things that, a lot of home builders want to be doing anyway, arguably should be doing. Things like developing the data that you need to develop a flight manual for the aircraft. More familiarizing yourself with the aircraft, and most importantly, having a distinct purpose for every hour of that flight testing process. I mean, I've been involved with flight testing myself, and I think we'll all admit at one point or another we just went up there to run time off, which is a bad thing to say, but most of us do it at one time or another. So basically, we went to the FAA and said, well. And by the way, the data bears out, if you look at the hours, across an aircraft's early life, 25 or 40 is not really any kind of an inflection point. The most dangerous time statistically is those first 8 hours. If something's going to fail, it usually happens there. And then that curve is pretty much flat for at least the first 100 or so hours, I think a little bit beyond that. So really what we're saying is, let's give pilots the ability to just go through what a lot of them are doing already, and then just say when you're done, you're done. So as far as how the program works, it's administered in a similar way to the additional pilot program. So when it goes live, you'll get in your operating limitations a limitation that says 25 or 40 hours unless you're operating under the auspices of this program. The program itself is housed, and I do want to be clear on this because it is in a little bit of a counterintuitive place. It's housed within Advisory Circular 9089, which is the ultralight and amateur built flight testing handbook. So that's a document that goes back several decades. The EAA actually worked with the FAA to create a number of years ago. But it's a portion of that document actually has that task-based system in it. So that's important for people to understand. The whole thing is not task-based phase one. It's that section. And one of the things that we commented on was making that a little bit clearer in the document. But anyway, it very closely mirrors the program that we came up with for the EAA flight test manual, which we believe is the best possible program that we could put out there as far as something that's achievable but also thorough. So our program includes 19 tests, including fuel flow testing. So fuel flow testing and then 18 actual flight test cards. And it's everything from your first flight to testing out different configurations, doing your stall testing, VX/VY, all the basic stuff, up to some a little bit more advanced things like directional stability and stuff like that. So anyway, in a nutshell, that's what it is. It doesn't mandate the use of our flight test manual. We think that anybody who uses it will have a pretty easy time doing it. But anybody could create a program that meets the requirement. And there's no need for FAA acceptance or anything like that. So manufacturers could come up with these kinds of things. Individual builders could do it, or other authors. We feel that our flight test manual is certainly a good starting point, but not the end all and be all.
The opportunity here is not just really to cut down the number of hours. That's a side effect of using a better system to get the entire flight test profile put together. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. The flight test manual actually goes back. We released it finally in 2018, but that's the result of a collaboration we've done, as Sean said, with some highly experienced EAA volunteers that goes back many years. I think back into the late 90s, and we were finally able to kind of coalesce all of that guidance and get it out the door. And our intent is we're actually in the middle of a revision cycle right now, and our intent is to keep it updated with the best language possible. But we're also working on other programs as far as being able to come up a little bit easier with an operating handbook for your aircraft. Maybe some creation tools that we can make available to the community, and some other guidance as well. So we're certainly not stopping on that.
That's great, because I think it recognizes that our industry is really quite disparate. We have some manufacturers who have a lot of documentation, and we have some kit builders who go, well, you got the airplane, you figure it out, and everything in between. And one isn't necessarily better than the other, but it's fair to say that the variation is quite large. So I'm curious, though. I'm sure there is some discussion about what this could potentially do for safety in home builds. I mean, clearly, if you have a plan besides going out there boring holes for the first 8 hours, the potential there is to really improve the safety record in those crucial first few hours. How do you think this will affect it?
Yeah, let me jump on that one, Tom. You're absolutely right, Mark, and you alluded to this earlier. We are seeing an evolution of the home building world, and it's no longer an experiment, right? I mean, yes, it's an experimental aircraft, although Mosaic and its outcomes probably will change that to some degree by itself. But the essential truth of the community is we've got people, for the most part, large percentage, that are pursuing known designs that are well proven, and the assembly process is well spec'd out, and it's a very rewarding, enjoyable process. But it's not an experiment. It's not something that someone is really going out and testing, evaluating, determining from scratch built standpoint. I mean, there's still a few, and that's good too. That's all part of our community. But this is about a process that is more attuned to what is the reality of today's environment, and the kinds of home building that the bulk of our membership is pursuing. So this will enable people to have a much more effective operating handbook, if you will, that will give them more useful data and more helpful information to be able to safely operate their airplane. And it will, like it's done in the TC world, it will impact safety. There's just no question about it. As I said earlier, it's important that we kept the traditional pathway intact for those that see that venue better for their particular application. That's okay as well. But ultimately, I think either path that you take, and particularly with this new task-based approach, having a good solid POH, that's important for everybody. Everyone who produces whatever your dream build is needs to have that baseline for how to safely and effectively operate the airplane. It's just going to be an improvement of safety. There's no question.
And it's also going to be, I think, an enhancement for the second owner market, or the subsequent owner market as well. If you generate a solid aircraft operating handbook in phase one, a lot of people that are getting into home builds today, that are buying them secondhand, are coming out of a type certified world. So they're expecting a certain level of documentation with the aircraft. And I do want to be clear that, we're not looking at like a professional quality, fully compliant to the Part 23 rule handbook. We're looking at something that's achievable for really anybody. But just having the performance and procedures documented is huge for the next person to lay hands on that airplane.
Yeah, well, and Tom brings up a really good point, Mark, that the second owner community is by far the fastest growing segment we're seeing today. It's a big deal, and it's a big part of the future of general aviation as a whole. So the more we can have that kind of support material and availability, we view it as even an appropriate and effective way to transition train, is going through task-based flight testing as part of a transition to a second owned hull. Because let's face it, not every airplane is the same as far as performance. You even see that in the TC world, right? If you buy a 40-year-old Piper, chances are it's not going to perform exactly to the spec that it did when it was brand new, undergoing flight test at Piper Aircraft.
Right.
So this is a very effective way to really learn the specifics of your new machine, your new pride and joy, and have an effective transition to it in the process.
Let me just twist over to the idea of what we think we're in terms of time frame here. I know that this was reported on April 1st. The comment period closed on April 29th. What do you think the time frame is for this to become an effective rulemaking here?
Well, the good news is it's not rulemaking, it's policy,
Right.
which is still went through the public comment process, as most impactful policies do in today's structure. But it does mean that it will happen fairly quickly in comparison to rulemaking.
Right.
They still have to disposition the comments. They still have to put any appropriate changes or mitigations based on those comments, and then publish the final policy. But Tom, in your discussions, do you have an actual time frame? I can certainly take a wag at it, but you might know better than I.
Yeah, I haven't gotten an estimate since we came back in from comments last week. And you know, the amount of time they'll pass, as Sean said, really has to do a lot with the number and content of the comments. So you know, we certainly had a couple pages of comments, you know, mostly technical in nature. So those all do have to be dispositioned and hopefully agreed with. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say probably 6 months minimum, something in that nature, somewhere around that nature. Maybe a little longer. Sometimes things tend to drag out a little bit, but it's probably about right.
You know, as we always do, Mark, we will be obviously interacting with the key decision makers of FAA at AirVenture, and we will certainly be looking to try to get a commitment to a final deadline at that time frame, because that's typically when they'll make announcements like that, is at the event. So we'll be looking for it then.
So I'm really excited to see this because it recognizes fundamental changes in the home building culture and environment that we're working with. As you guys said earlier, the airplanes that are coming out in the most numbers are really very well-known designs, and the flight test, and I don't want to diminish it at all, but it's more like production flight test than it is experimental flight test. You're verifying things that you feel like you already know about the airplane, putting time on it to make sure that systems that are prone to infant mortality have a chance to do it in a safe way, and things like that, rather than, hey, will the wings stay on, or does it stall and want to kill me every time? We're not really looking for that for the vast majority of home builds that are being flown today. But do you have a sense that this may be another opportunity for the FAA to recognize that our world is really changing into a sense of normalcy, if you will? I mean, much more common designs, so in some ways, much less experimental designs and radical designs. And do you see this as an opportunity to get some future relief or some future changes in the way we go about our business that may make the sport more accessible as we go forward?
Absolutely. Your term of normalcy, Mark, I like to phrase or term as mainstream.
There you go.
We are going to see, because it's happening now, right? It's the most affordable path. The nature of the certification process for experimental aircraft it has the most freedoms and the most ability to modify and improve and innovate. All of the things that are fundamental to growth are contained within this community. And certainly this is a recognition by the agency and by the community. Frankly, the fact that, you know, all the EA membership, you know, through EA headquarters, and it's enabled both additional pilot program, which these dovetail, as Tom described so nicely, where maybe you're not comfortable performing all the task-based activities, but now you can actually, during phase one, if it's a new build, take a qualified test pilot and bring the person that you know is the ace of the base and meets that matrix, and do task-based evaluation and data collection. What a powerful tool. Even if you're transitioning, you can still do it that way and have a much better airframe at the end if you're a second owner. So absolutely, this will enable growth, this will improve safety, and ultimately it will pave the way for this entire community becoming even more mainstream than it is now. And it's pretty mainstream already. Just look around your average GA airport.
Well, let me wrap up with one little question here regarding the ELSA stuff. Now, I know that kind of has its own flight phase one test requirements, which I believe are 5 hours generally. These changes to the advisory circular won't impact that, will they?
I'm actually not sure. It would depend on what the operating limitation winds up being for ELSA. The only thing about ELSA, of course, is that it's a 5-hour test period generally. Right. So while we would encourage anybody who does an ELSA to also go through the flight test manual and validate the manufacturer's specifications that they put in their specs and procedures. You know, most people who go through the flight test manual will take longer than 5 hours to do it. So, and most people go through, you know, these, you know, 18, 19 tasks will take more than 5 hours to do it. So it probably won't. It probably won't make much of a difference for ELSA builders versus amateur builders.
As far as a compliance aspect, Tom's right, spot on. But the fact that there's going to be a fair amount of people that see value to doing this, regardless of if it's helpful or beneficial from a time standpoint or not, because of the end product that you get. So I think you'll still see people gravitate towards this as a better way to flight test.
Yeah. And as Sean said before, we're working on in the next, you know, the next edition of the flight test manual, specific guidance for people who pick up an aircraft as a subsequent owner and want to familiarize themselves. This could be a really great transition training and familiarization process for those folks.
Absolutely. You could cherry pick a few pages out of the flight test manual and say, okay, here's something to get me familiar with the airplane. And even better yet, if you have the data from the original flight test and sort of could compare it to what the airplane is doing now, that's even a better data point to go, okay, well, the airplane has aged in this way or something has changed in this way. But it's just more data for the new owner and the new pilot to go with. And any way we can get our guys more familiar with their own airplanes and more comfortable with them, the safety record has got to improve. There's just no question about it.
Absolutely. And I did want to just mention one other thing too. I mean, we talked a lot about kind of production testing and established kits and stuff like that. I mean, there's still one-offs being built, and it's still very important. I mean, heck, even Van started off as a one-off before his kits became popular. And this is for them too. This is for the one-offs as well. I mean, there's nothing in the flight test manual that would really be, and TaskBased Phase I that would be different for those. And it might even be more beneficial for them because, you know, you're talking about an aircraft that, you know, when it does hit the used market, it's going to be much more unique than a lot of other aircraft out there. And the guidance that's created out of this will be very beneficial for subsequent owners of that aircraft as well as the builder.
That combination of the additional pilot program and TaskBased Phase I probably is even more relevant to that type of a project as you just described.
Yeah, and we're working on some changes for additional pilot as well that will expand the envelope of aircraft that are eligible. So there's more to come on that front as well.
That's great. I think if you're building a one-off and you decide you want to sell it at some point, combination of that, an extremely detailed build log with you know, an incredible number of photos and details about that, a very detailed flight test program, and if you could plop down a huge binder of data in front of somebody and say, well, you know, it's not an RV, but look what it does, and I can document this. That's good for so many people in so many ways. So I think if we could get past the idea of, I hate to use the term pencil whipping, but if we can get past the idea of treating flight test casually, we'll be in really, really good shape. And it benefits everybody from the guy who owns the airplane now to the next few people who might. And I think it'll help our safety record. So, well, guys, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. I know you guys are busy. I know you're eagerly awaiting the run up to AirVenture. I know we're super excited to have a fly-in and a big show this summer. But again, thanks for your time today, and we'll definitely update our readers on kitplanes.com when the final rule is put out, and we'll let you guys know when this is active. But thanks for your time.
You bet, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark.